So, picture this. It's 2:17 a.m., and deep inside Kev's secret airfields, everything's dead quiet, you know? Like, eerily calm. But then, out of nowhere, these Ukrainian long-range drones just roar to life, their little propellers cutting through the pitch-black night, while these massive rockets and Storm Shadow cruise missiles go blasting off from the Dnipro riverbanks. And get this, this wasn't just some random hit-and-run thing. No way! This was like a full-blown, multi-layered attack designed to crack open Russia's forward shield at Belgar, which is basically the last buffer before Moscow. I'm telling you, in just seconds, all that calm was about to get absolutely shattered. And what happened next? Well, it became like a masterclass in modern warfare. So the calm gets completely obliterated when the first wave crosses the border, and these things are flying barely 100 feet above the treetops. Can you imagine? These Ukrainian long-range drones are just skimming through the darkness, hugging those river valleys to stay completely invisible to Russian radar. And at the exact same moment, these ATACMS missiles are streaking overhead at nearly Mach 3, with their warheads just slamming into Russian radar stations and early warning sites on Belgar's outskirts. Boom! Screens go black everywhere. The operators are just sitting there stunned because Russia's eyes along the frontier had literally just been blinded. Meanwhile, on the ground, the armor's moving. We're talking Leopard 2A6 tanks and Britain's Challenger 2s rolling forward at over 40 miles per hour. Their 120mm guns just cracking the night with this thunderous precision. Every single shot was so deliberate. Command posts, ammunition trucks, and these entrenched artillery pits just erupted into these massive fireballs. Infantry fighting vehicles followed right behind, pouring squads of soldiers into the gaps that the tanks had torn open. The Russians tried to counter quickly, you know? Columns of T-72s and BMPs surged out of Belgar's southern districts, determined to block the advance. But here's the thing, Ukrainian infantry had already prepared the ground. Anti-tank mines were laced all along the approaches, detonating in these brutal flashes that just tore through the lead vehicles. Then came the javelins and NLAWs, striking the stragglers as chaos spread everywhere. By dawn, these smoke columns were rising thousands of feet into the sky above Belgar. The city's forward logistics hub was completely crippled, fuel depots burning, rail yards shattered. For Ukraine, the first door into Russia's interior was now standing wide open. And according to a lot of the data there, the flames of Belgar were still lighting up the horizon when Ukraine pushed deeper. With Russia's frontline hub completely shattered, the next target was looming, Voronezh, this sprawling industrial city 200 miles north, and a vital artery feeding Moscow's war machine. From the skies, Ukrainian Su-27s and MiG-29s cut through the night at 15,000 feet, their wings heavy with JDAM missiles. As they approached Voronezh, the bombs dropped free, their GPS kits guiding them with pinpoint accuracy. Seconds later, these massive oil storage tanks erupted, sending towers of flame 500 feet into the air. The shockwaves shattered windows across entire neighborhoods, the glow visible for miles. It was the kind of strike that no propaganda could disguise. But Russia wasn't just sitting there passively. From way out in the Black Sea, a submarine unleashed Kaliber cruise missiles streaking north at nearly 600 miles per hour. Within minutes, alarms were sounding across Ukrainian positions. Yet Patriot PAC-3 batteries stood ready. With radar locked on, interceptors screamed upward at over Mach 4, meeting the Kalibers head-on. Mid-air fireballs lit the sky, fragments raining harmlessly into empty fields. Ukraine had blunted the counterpunch. Closer to the ground, the battle turned absolutely ruthless. On the M4 highway, Russia's main supply route to Moscow, convoys of trucks and armored carriers thundered north, headlights cutting through the dark. Then the buzz began, small, almost insignificant, until it grew into this deadly swarm. FPV suicide drones dove at 120 miles per hour, each carrying several pounds of explosives. One after another, they smashed into fuel trucks, ammo carriers, and armored escorts. Explosions rolled down the highway like falling dominoes, fire engulfing vehicle after vehicle, until the road itself was a corridor of destruction. By dawn, Voronezh was unrecognizable. Oil depots burned uncontrollably, ammunition dumps detonated in chain reactions, and the M4 highway was littered with twisted steel and blackened wreckage. Russia's resupply line to Moscow had been severed, its logistical artery bleeding fire. For Ukraine, the strike was more than tactical, it was strategic. With Belgar crippled and Voronezh aflame, Moscow stood increasingly isolated. Voronezh burned through the night, its oil depots and convoys reduced to rubble. But Russia, humiliated on its own soil, could not remain silent. The Kremlin ordered a response, this time not from the skies above Moscow, but from the depths of the Black Sea. Beneath the waves, a Russian Kilo-class submarine glided silently, its missile tubes loaded with Caliber cruise missiles. At 3:42, hatches snapped open. One after another, missiles burst into the night, their rocket boosters igniting with fiery tails as they arced north toward Kiev, flying just under the speed of sound. Each carried a 1,000-pound warhead designed to tear into command centers and infrastructure. The Kremlin expected shock and terror. Instead, the missiles met steel resolve. Radar screens inside Ukraine lit up. Patriot PAC-3 batteries already on alert. At over Mach 4, interceptors launched skyward, their trails cutting through the darkness. Within seconds, the first intercepts lit the night above Kiev, blinding flashes followed by showers of debris. Out of dozens of missiles fired, the majority were obliterated mid-air, their fragments raining harmlessly into empty fields. The message was clear: Ukraine's shield was holding, but Russia wasn't finished. From the surface of the Black Sea, frigates loosed P-800 Onyx supersonic missiles, each tearing across the water at nearly 2,700 miles per hour. Their low trajectory made them harder to catch, screaming toward Ukrainian coastal infrastructure. Yet Ukraine had prepared for this front as well. As the Onyx raced inland, the sea itself fought back. From hidden ports and camouflaged bays, Ukraine unleashed its naval drones, low-slung fast attack craft packed with explosives, skimming just feet above the waves. They closed on Russian frigates at 50 knots, weaving through tracer fire. At the same time, Neptune anti-ship missiles thundered off their launchers, homing in on the enemy fleet. Caught between drones from below and missiles from above, Russia's naval formation fractured. One frigate swerved violently, colliding with another as a Neptune warhead slammed into its hull. Flames erupted across the deck, sailors scrambling as secondary explosions lit the night sea. Meanwhile, a naval drone found its mark, ramming into a corvette's stern and detonating in a towering spray of water and fire. By dawn, the Black Sea was alive with smoke and wreckage. Russia's retaliation had failed to break Ukraine's defenses, and in the process, a new front had been forced open. The war was no longer confined to land and air. It had become a battle for control of the sea. For Moscow, the cost was clear. Every strike to reassert dominance stretched its forces thinner, while Ukraine only grew bolder. The Black Sea still burned with the wrecks of Russian ships when Ukraine shifted the fight back inland. The naval clash had done more than damage steel. It had forced Russia to divide its strength, stretching its defenses thin. And in that moment of disarray, Ukraine prepared the next phase, the long road to Moscow itself. At 4:28, the first wave of long-range drones slipped across the frontier. Each carried 90 to 100 pounds of explosives, their small engines humming just above the treetops. Flying at barely 200 feet, they hugged river valleys, traced the outlines of forests, and followed roads like shadows. Radar stations swept the skies overhead, but the drones were ghosts, too low, too slow, too quiet to register. For hundreds of miles, they moved north unseen, their waypoints calculated with surgical precision. But the drones were only one piece of the assault. From the skies, Storm Shadow cruise missiles streaked forward at nearly 600 miles per hour. Their targets: Russian air bases near Tula, just 100 miles south of Moscow. Within seconds, hardened shelters cracked open, fireballs consuming runways and fuel depots. More importantly, the strikes grounded Russian fighter squadrons. Jets that might have intercepted the incoming waves never left the ground. Meanwhile, on the earth below, Ukraine's shadow warriors advanced. Special forces units slipped through the night, striking deep behind enemy lines. Their mission was not destruction, but silence. Near Tula, they infiltrated relay stations and fiber optic hubs, planting charges along Russia's military communication cables. At 5:12, the detonations ripped through the network. In an instant, entire sectors went dark. Commanders shouting into dead radios, orders lost in static. For a brief but critical window, Russia was blind. The effect was suffocating. Drones advanced unchecked, missiles slammed into airfields, explosions rolled across highways, and Russian commanders, unable to coordinate, could only react piecemeal. Every move came too late, every defense fractured before it formed. This was more than firepower. It was choreography. Air, land, and cyber woven together in one relentless offensive. Each strike fed the next, each success opening a door for another blow. Ukraine's message was unmistakable. Moscow was no longer shielded by distance, nor by the myth of invulnerability. Every valley, every forest, every river had become a pathway for war. By sunrise, the road to Moscow lay open. And for the first time in generations, the capital of Russia faced the unthinkable. A war that had crossed every frontier and was now pressing on its very heart. The strikes near Tula had barely stopped echoing when the drones pressed forward. Their flight paths curved north, skimming rivers and forests until the lights of Moscow flickered on the horizon. For decades, the capital had been wrapped in concentric rings of air defense, S-400 batteries, Pantsir launchers on rooftops, radar arrays stretching hundreds of miles. Russian generals boasted that the city was untouchable. Now, in the early hours of the morning, that illusion was about to collapse. At 5:41, alarms wailed across the city. On tower blocks and government roofs, Pantsir systems snapped to life, their barrels tilting skyward. Tracer fire ripped through the darkness, green and red streaks clawing at the night. S-400 missiles launched in deafening bursts, their exhaust plumes lighting entire districts like false dawn. Some drones were shredded mid-air, fragments raining down on empty streets. But not all. Several slipped through the chaos. One drone tore across the southern district before slamming into a fuel depot, the explosion sending a fireball hundreds of feet high. Another struck the glass towers of Moscow City's financial hub. Shards of glass cascaded down like glittering rain, while smoke gushed upward into the skyline, once thought impregnable. Too late, Russian fighters scrambled. MiG-31s and Su-35s clawed into the sky, but coordination faltered with communications still crippled from earlier strikes. Pilots had no clear targets, no unified command. The result was confusion, jets circling above a city already burning, chasing shadows while more drones buzzed past beneath them. For ordinary Muscovites, it was a night unlike any in living memory. People poured onto balconies, phones in hand, recording the fire streaks and detonations. Panic spread across neighborhoods as sirens wailed and highways jammed. For the first time since World War II, Moscow was under direct attack, its residents staring upward in disbelief as war unfolded over their own rooftops. The smoke still rose over Moscow's skyline when the digital battlefield erupted. Within minutes, videos of fireballs and tracer fire flooded Telegram, Twitter, and TikTok. Apartment balconies had become observation posts, citizens recording the night sky ablaze above their own city. The Kremlin's early claim that all drones were destroyed collapsed instantly under the weight of viral footage showing burning towers and shattered glass. For the Russian elite, the shock was even sharper. Oligarchs who once believed their wealth and proximity to power insulated them now stared at screens in disbelief. If drones could punch through the capital's billion-dollar defenses, what mansion, what private jet was truly safe? Ministers whispered in panic, generals shuffled blame. In marble halls and secret bunkers, the same unspoken question echoed: if Moscow can burn, what can't? The symbolism cut deeper than the explosions themselves. For years, Russians were told the war was distant, contained. Now, it had come home, clawing at the very heart of the state. And in that moment, Ukraine's message was undeniable. The war you unleash will no longer stay beyond your borders. It is here, on your streets, under your sky, at your doorstep. As the last echoes of panic rippled through Moscow, the verdict was clear. Belgorod lay crippled, Voronezh consumed by flames, and even the capital itself had been pierced. Russia's vaunted air defenses shattered in a single campaign. Strategically, the Kremlin was forced to pull assets from the front lines to shield its own heart, weakening its armies elsewhere. Yet, amid the devastation, Ukrainian soldiers tended to captured and wounded Russians, proving victory need not mean cruelty. Above Moscow, trails of drone smoke still lingered in the dawn light, a stark symbol of a new era of warfare now begun. At 3:47 a.m. on the outskirts of Donetsk Oblast, the air was cold and damp, clinging to the fields like a second skin. Without warning, a Russian armored battalion, over 60 main battle tanks backed by fuel trucks and command vehicles, rolled out from a forward staging area heading toward a thinly held Ukrainian defensive sector. Their route cut across open farmland, broken only by scattered tree lines. This wasn't just an advance, it was a regimental-sized push to sever a key supply route. In seconds, the calm would shatter, and what followed would become a lesson in modern warfare written in fire, steel, and the unblinking eye of combat drones. Beneath layers of reinforced concrete and steel in a dimly lit underground command post, the air was tense and still. Screens flickered with fresh satellite imagery and live drone feeds from forward reconnaissance units. The reports were unmistakable. Russia's armored battalion was less than 12 miles from breaching the sector's thin defensive line. The Southern Front's commanding general didn't hesitate. His voice cut through the room like a blade. "Intercept now! Don't give them time to dig in." Within minutes, a multi-phase battle plan snapped into place. First, high-altitude reconnaissance, UAVs, would maintain constant visual on the column, marking targets and identifying weak spots in the formation. Then, waves of loitering munitions, precision kamikaze drones, would spearhead the assault, slamming into lead tanks and fuel carriers to break momentum. Next came the flying mines, small quadcopters armed with shaped charges, tasked with disabling tracks and immobilizing armor caught in choke points. As chaos spread through the column, motorcycle assault teams would surge forward, weaving between stalled vehicles, targeting exposed crews, and seizing control of abandoned machines. Finally, infantry units would close in from multiple vectors, cutting off escape routes and tightening the noose around any remaining Russian forces. It was a plan designed for speed, precision, and psychological impact, and every second of preparation brought the Ukrainians closer to unleashing it. The battlefield was about to shift from open farmland to a killing ground controlled entirely from the sky. At 4:05 a.m., The plan that had been finalized in the underground command post less than 20 minutes earlier roared into life. From two different approach vectors, one sweeping in from the northeast, the other from the south, a pair of Bayraktar TB-2 strike drones glided silently through the pre-dawn darkness. High above the tree lines, their infrared optics painted crisp outlines of the Russian formation below, pinpointing the most critical nodes in the armored column: command vehicles and fuel trucks. The TB-2s launched their first salvo, laser-guided munitions that struck with surgical precision. The first explosion tore through a fuel truck, sending a geyser of fire and smoke hundreds of feet into the air. The second ripped apart another tanker, its burning wreckage spilling across the road and blocking half the column. By the third strike, a mobile command vehicle took a direct hit, its radio mast folding in on itself like a collapsing tower. Almost simultaneously, a wave of loitering munitions, small, agile, and nearly invisible against the dim horizon, descended on the convoy from the opposite flank. They dove straight into their marks: two more fuel carriers and an auxiliary communications vehicle. In under 2 minutes, 4 fuel trucks and 1 key command vehicle were nothing more than twisted, burning husks. The effect was immediate and devastating. Without fuel resupply, the tanks could not push far. Without reliable communications, their coordination collapsed. Russian operators scrambled to re-establish contact, but the jamming effect of burning equipment and fragmented signals left them in disarray. The battalion's advance ground to a halt. Dozens of tanks and armored personnel carriers now sat exposed in the middle of open farmland, engines idling, crews scanning nervously for threats they couldn't yet see. The once formidable column had transformed into a stationary, vulnerable target, a steel serpent frozen in place. From the Ukrainian perspective, it was exactly as planned. Phase 1 was complete, momentum broken, command disrupted, and fuel lines severed. The battlefield had shifted in their favor, and the next waves of the operation, flying mines, rapid assault teams, and infantry encirclement, were already moving into position. The Russians just didn't know it yet. The burning fuel truck still sent thick black plumes hundreds of feet into the sky when Russian commanders tried to salvage the situation. Realizing their armored column was now stranded in open terrain, they ordered self-propelled artillery forward to provide covering fire and clear a path. 2 massive S-19 Emista S howitzers began lumbering up from the rear, their crews hoping to suppress any Ukrainian positions before the ambush could escalate further. But the Ukrainians had anticipated this move. From concealed positions nearly 4 miles away, a swarm of FPV attack drones streaked over the fields. Guided by live video feeds and flown with pinpoint accuracy, they dove straight into the exposed artillery pieces. The first hit detonated a full ammunition rack inside the lead howitzer, blasting its turret skyward in a shower of fire and steel. Seconds later, the second Miste S erupted into a boiling fireball, its crew never having fired a shot. With Russian artillery support neutralized, Ukraine moved to Phase 2. Fast-moving armored assault teams, lightly equipped for speed, raced in from opposite ends of the column. Their goal was clear: seal off the convoy's escape routes. Within minutes, Ukrainian BTRs and MRAPs blocked both the northern and southern exits, hemming the Russians into a narrow kill zone barely 1,000 yards long. The trapped Russian crews tried to reposition, but the disarray from the earlier drone strikes left them confused and vulnerable. Ukrainian gunners positioned in concealed tree lines opened up with anti-tank guided missiles and precision mortar fire. Each strike was methodical, targeting vehicles that tried to maneuver or pivot their turrets toward the flanks. The effect was suffocating. Several tanks threw tracks as they tried to reverse over uneven ground, immobilizing themselves. Others, fearing a direct hit, were abandoned by their crews, who fled on foot toward distant hedgerows. The once organized armored spearhead had devolved into scattered pockets of resistance, each isolated and unable to coordinate. By the end of the second phase, the convoy was no longer a threat. It was a collection of stranded, demoralized machines. The Russians had lost their artillery cover, their mobility, and their ability to break contact. For Ukraine, the kill zone was now fully established, and the stage was set for the night raid that would strip the Russians of both their armor and their will to fight. The steel serpent was cornered, and its head was about to be cut off. Night fell over the kill zone like a shroud. The last embers from burning Russian vehicles casting a faint orange glow across the open fields. By now, the trapped battalion was cut off, artillery support gone, escape routes sealed. That's when the Ukrainian Special Operations units moved in for the decisive strike. Approaching under total blackout conditions, the operators advanced in small fire teams, weaving through hedgerows and shallow drainage ditches to stay hidden. Each carried compact RF jamming devices tuned to disrupt and blind the infrared camera systems mounted on Russian tanks and armored vehicles. Within seconds of activation, the targeting feeds in the Russian optics went dark, leaving their gunners effectively blind in the moonless night. Confusion spread quickly through the stranded column. Tank crews peered into the void, unable to spot movement beyond a few yards. Some began firing wildly into the darkness, wasting precious ammunition. Others made the split-second decision to abandon their machines entirely. That was when the Ukrainians struck. Using suppressed weapons and thermal scopes, they cleared vehicle by vehicle with ruthless efficiency. Those who resisted were pinned down or flushed out with stun grenades. Those who surrendered were disarmed and escorted away under guard. A number of Russian soldiers simply ran south toward the distant tree line, hoping to escape in the dark. By 2:30 a.m., the scale of the seizure was staggering. 20 main battle tanks, mostly T-72s and T-80s, captured intact. Many still had their main guns loaded, fuel tanks full, and communication gear operational. It was as if the crews had left mid-mission, walking away from machines worth millions of dollars apiece. Ukrainian engineers and recovery crews moved in almost immediately. Under the cover of darkness, they began towing the captured armor toward friendly lines. Some of the more operational tanks were driven out by Ukrainian soldiers who had trained on the same models earlier in the war. The night raid was over in less than 2 hours. What remained in the field were smoldering wrecks, discarded weapons, and the unmistakable absence of the Russian armored spearhead. The battlefield that had started the day as a threat to Ukraine's southern flank was now an open graveyard of steel, and Ukraine held the keys to every tank worth saving. By dawn, the night raid had left the once formidable Russian column gutted and silent. In the pale first light, Ukrainian recovery crews rolled in, their armored tow vehicles and flatbeds rumbling across the churned-up fields. One by one, the captured tanks, still glistening with dew and streaked with soot, were hooked up and hauled towards secured staging areas behind the lines. For the more intact machines, there was no time to waste. Ukrainian tank crews, many already trained on T-72 and T-80 platforms, climbed into the still warm driver seats. Engines roared back to life, and columns of liberated armor began making the 12-mile trip to friendly territory under their own power. At forward depots, military engineers and mechanics worked in tight, efficient teams. Each tank underwent a rapid inspection, checking engine performance, ammunition storage, and damage to optics or armor. The first task was always the same: strip away Russian markings and paint on fresh Ukrainian insignia. Then came the communications overhaul, replacing or reprogramming radios to mesh with Ukrainian command networks. Some of the best conditioned tanks were earmarked for immediate redeployment. Within hours, a few were already en route to reinforce active sectors on the front, a turnaround so fast it blurred the line between spoils of war and active combat assets. But the vehicles carried more than firepower. Inside the compartments, Ukrainian intelligence teams uncovered a trove of sensitive materials, encryption devices, detailed battlefield maps, and radio frequency data still loaded into onboard systems. These were rushed to secure analysis centers, where signals experts began sifting through for clues about Russian unit dispositions, command protocols, and planned movements. In terms of raw intelligence value, it was the kind of jackpot no satellite could buy. By mid-morning, the field where the Russian spearhead had stalled was empty, save for burned-out hulks and scattered debris. The real prize was already moving, either on the back of a Ukrainian flatbed or rumbling under its own treads toward new missions. What had started the night before as a high-risk raid had ended in one of the war's most efficient battlefield conversions, turning the enemy's steel into Ukraine's strength and their own technology into weapons that could, and soon, would be used against them. The operation's impact was felt far beyond the smoking field where the Russian column once stood. Tactically, Ukraine had delivered a textbook demonstration of multi-phase warfare, integrating UAV reconnaissance, precision drone strikes, special forces raids, and rapid armored exploitation into a seamless sequence. What began as a scattered convoy of over 60 Russian tanks had been systematically broken down, isolated, and transformed into a resource for the very army it sought to destroy. Psychologically, the blow to Russian forces was profound. News traveled fast through the ranks. Entire tank crews had fled, their vehicles now in Ukrainian hands, some already redeployed to active fronts. For Russian soldiers, the realization that their own weapons could be turned against them within days eroded any remaining sense of security. Confidence in their ability to protect high-value assets, tanks, artillery, and command vehicles, was shaken to the core. On the information front, Ukraine seized the narrative as effectively as it had seized the armor. Images of captured Russian tanks, freshly painted with Ukrainian flags, flooded social media and global news outlets. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Russia, in effect, had become one of Ukraine's largest suppliers of tanks. What might have been just another battlefield victory instead became a strategic public relations triumph, reinforcing Ukraine's image as resourceful, adaptive, and relentless. It was a message broadcast to the world, and an even louder warning to Moscow. In less than 48 hours, Ukraine had seized 50 Russian main battle tanks, dismantling an entire armored push, and flipping the momentum of the fight in Donetsk Oblast. What began as a potential breakthrough for Russian forces ended as a complete reversal, one that left Ukraine not only with valuable hardware, but also with a renewed battlefield advantage. Strategically, the loss was crippling for Moscow. An entire assault element had been removed from the order of battle, forcing Russian planners to rethink operations across the sector. The reputational damage was just as severe. Footage of abandoned, captured, and repainted tanks undermined years of military posturing. The victory raised a sharper question, one both tactical and psychological. Is any Russian convoy truly safe from this style of warfare? And if not, how long can Moscow afford to leave this vulnerability unaddressed before it becomes a recurring nightmare? The lesson was clear. In modern war, speed, layered coordination, and real-time intelligence can neutralize even the heaviest armored formations faster than any single wonder weapon. Ukraine's fusion of UAV reconnaissance, special forces raids, and mechanized exploitation had turned raw agility into decisive power. As the first light of dawn spread across the horizon, black columns of smoke climbed into the gray sky. Through the haze, Ukrainian soldiers guided Russian prisoners away from the wreckage, a victory measured not just in captured steel, but in humanity preserved amid the fire and ruin.